What companies deserve your hard-earned dollar? Which would you want to work for? How can you know if they share your values? Just ask us. Just Capital is a nonprofit that tracks who really means business in supporting workers, customers, communities, the environment, and shareholders. We measure progress, track success, and help them be better. When you see the Just Capital seal, you know what's real, because just business is better business. Visit justcapital.com to learn who makes your dollar count.
At 4 in the afternoon, Mottek On Money, live on the air here at 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KABC.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KABC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. We have another record-shattering day for the stock market. Stocks finishing higher today with the Dow continuing to wow. So did the S&P 500. Another round of record high closes today as the market saw favorable corporate earnings news. We saw the Dow close up 156 points, settling at a record high 38,677. The S&P 500 moved up nearly 41, and the NASDAQ composite ended up 148 points. The stock market rallied today with the focus of attention on the prospects of, well, despite having possibly to wait until May for an interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve, Wall Street refocusing its attention on corporate earnings today. We saw, for example, Uber clearing Wall Street's bar for the company's earnings by reporting fourth quarter revenue that rose nearly $10 billion. CVS, the drugstore chain, moving higher, beating fourth quarter profit expectations. Those are some of the highlights today. And we're watching, after the closing bell, the earnings parade continuing. Bank shares finishing higher by nearly, the New York Community Bank Corp shares, that is, finished higher by nearly 7% after the lender named no executive chair and said total deposits have increased in the last several weeks. That's the bank that's been in the spotlight lately. Investors continue to scrutinize the exposure of regional banks to the commercial real estate sector. This, of course, is something we've been talking about for the last year or so. Moody's Investor Service downgraded the credit of New York Community Bank Corp by 2 notches late yesterday. Taking a look at some of the other readings today, we saw the trade deficit widen slightly in December to $62.2 billion. We heard from some Fed heads today. The Fed governor of one of the Fed governors, I should say, Adriana Kugler, said it would be appropriate to lower interest rates if inflation continues to slow, and that it's critical that inflation returns to the Fed's target of 2%. We also heard from the Richmond Fed president, Tom Barkin, who said it's a good idea for the Fed to take its time with rate cuts. So we're getting different views from the various Fed officials. LA-based Snap, the social media company, or as they call it, a camera company, closing down nearly 35% today, a day after that company reported another revenue miss and offered a disappointing earnings outlook. Ford shares moving up about 6%. Ford reported its quarterly revenue above Wall Street analysts' expectations. And shares of Chipotle Mexican Grill moving higher by more than 7% after that company delivered better than expected fourth quarter results. More layoff announcements. Warner Music Group planning to lay off about 600 employees, or about 10% of its workforce, as part of a restructuring plan aimed at freeing up more cash to invest in music and boost growth. Warner shares moving down about 0.5% on that news. The price of oil moving up for the third day in a row as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to press on with the Gaza war against Hamas terrorists who attacked Israel last October 7th. Meanwhile, a U.S. drone strike, hit a car in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, killing 3 members of the militia there, including a high-ranking commander. The strike coming on a main thoroughfare in eastern Baghdad. A crowd gathered as emergency response teams picked through the wreckage. According to the Associated Press, security forces closed off the heavily guarded green zone where a number of diplomatic compounds are located, amid calls for protesters to storm the U.S. Embassy. We're watching these dramatic developments unfolding in the Middle East and, of course, watching what's happening as far as the economic impact of all this. I'll discuss the Middle East crisis and the impact on gas and oil prices with oil analyst John Kilduff, an again Capital and CNBC contributor, as we watch what's coming across the wires from the Middle East this afternoon. Retail crime, smash and grabs, and crime overall, a huge issue here in Los Angeles. A lot riding on the upcoming election for L.A. County District Attorney, in which the current DA George Gascon is being challenged for another term in office. while a recall effort continues to move through the court system. Coming up later this hour, I'll be speaking with another one of the candidates seeking to replace George Gascon. Attorney Nathan Hochman will be joining me live later this hour. But first, on Your Money, the markets and the economy. Joining us live now is Jonathan Hoenig, investment expert extraordinaire, Fox News and Fox Business contributor, and author of numerous books. And Jonathan, it's great to welcome you back to the show this afternoon on a record-shattering day for both the Dow and the S&P 500. Give us your reaction to the big news here, first of all.
Frank, I know you're doing more in 24, but I don't know how much more the stock market can do. I mean, come on. I mean, you don't even see it in the Dow, Frank. The Dow Jones is only up about 2% year to date. Once again, just as it was last year, it's all about tech. Palantir, Frank, up 42% this year. NVIDIA, which was up hundreds of percent last year, is up 45% just this year. And a stock by the name of Super Microcomputer, Frank, this is a large cap, big technology stock, up over 100% just this year, and it's barely February. So, look, the market's strong. We've got more new highs than new lows. But once again, all the action really is in tech.
We're doing it live with Jonathan Hoenig here, Fox News contributor, portfolio manager at Capitalist Pig Hedge Fund, and author of the book Price is Primary, How to Profit with Any Asset in Any Market at Any Time. We got the right guy on the air here as we do track a record-shattering performance for both the Dow and the S&P 500. What about NVIDIA? The AI craze continues. This got the ball rolling last year, of course, and along with the Magnificent Seven and all that. What are your thoughts about NVIDIA here? How much higher is it going? We probably saw some of the write-ups here, predictions that it's going to 800. Saw that this week. And what do you think of NVIDIA and the other AI darlings here at this point?
Well, there's an old saying, Frank, there's no tops in a bull market. And this is the nature of trends. They tend to go on and on much longer than any of us would believe, myself included. I mean, NVIDIA was a $500 stock basically just about a month ago. It's a $700 stock, as you mentioned, at a new all-time high today. And those all-time highs, although we have a tendency to say, well, the top is in, historically, they tend to follow new all-time highs after that. So, Frank, in terms of putting new money to work, I'm trying to find those places of the market that haven't yet gone up hundreds and hundreds of percent. But look, the momentum is with those AI plays, and the momentum is likely to continue, at least in the near term.
All right, how much more do you think this thing has to go? The Dow approaching 40K. We got to get the 40K hats printed, right? Remember, it was a big deal when the 20K hats came out, and 30, and now coming up here on 40. The expectation is that the Fed will ultimately cut rates, not in March, but maybe in May. Now, how do you expect this to all play out?
Well, I think that might be the monkey wrench, if you will, Frank. I mean, look, the 10-year, which is now about 4.1%, it was nearly 5% just back in October. So, rates have come down pretty dramatically, and also expectations about those rates. There was an interesting stat out this week from the Federal Reserve saying that for the first time in years, homeowners' expectations were, in fact, for lower interest rates rather than higher interest rates. So there's been a lot of change in expectations. And my fear, Frank, is that inflation simply hasn't gone away. We're still seeing gold up near an all-time high, and gold in currencies outside the U.S. dollar, in fact, is at all-time highs. So, I still think you don't want to bet all your assets on stocks or even be fully invested, because my fear is, in fact, that interest rates are probably going to go higher later in the year, surprising a lot of economists and investors alike.
Certainly the market's focused on the Fed and maybe Taylor Swift too, right? We got to give her some credit for pumping up the economy.
Look, anywhere you're seeing money being made, you're seeing people being rewarding that, Frank. But, I think there's places, as I said, to look beyond just those Magnificent Seven. For example, some of the most profitable companies lately have been shippers. It's not just big tech at an all-time high. The transportation index, IYT, is the ETF that tracks that index. It's at an all-time high. And what I like within that sector, Frank, are actually not jets or not trucks, but boats. Marine shipping. The ticker symbol on the one I like is BOAT, B-O-A-T. We actually own this over at capitalistpig.com. It yields over 10%, Frank, and basically there's a lot of things benefiting the shipping sector right now. Tension in the Middle East, increased demand in terms of global trade. Put it all together, I think you're going to make money in boats. Of course, do your own due diligence, but this is one off-the-radar screen idea. I think some money will be made in the months to come.
All right, and of course we're watching the cryptos rebound now. We see a Bitcoin up about 200 here to 44,300 or so, and that's been a wild ride since those Bitcoin ETFs came out just a couple of weeks ago, and we saw that run up and then a pullback here, and now suddenly Bitcoin's up around 44K. What is your observation here? Let's say on the performance of Bitcoin in all this.
I sound like an old Archie Bunker, Frank, I know, but can you explain to me what you do with Bitcoin? What do you do with it besides just have it, besides just own it? And this is my problem from Bitcoin basically since the get-go. Look, I've sat out a lot of the run higher, Frank, but look, when you invest in a company, an American company, an individual company, you actually own a share in a productive enterprise. I still haven't seen really a long-term investment case for Bitcoin, although, as you said, look, the move last year has been pretty generous, and even this year it's poking up. But I think, my only 2 cents, Frank, on Bitcoin is that this has to be a small part of your portfolio. If it hits, you'll obviously make money, but I think the real fear and the factor here is more on the downside than on the upside for Bitcoin.
All right, let's get back to the good old stock market then, and the earnings news certainly does drive the action. Did so today, as we saw. If you're just joining us, the Dow and the S&P 500 hit record highs today at the close. The Dow 156, the S&P 500 at 41, and both have hit record highs. The Nasdaq still below its all-time high, which was hit the first week of 2022. It did gain 148 today at 15,757. Certainly the oil names are getting new attention here, given what's happening in the Middle East, and we'll be talking to John Kilduff about that later this hour. But oil hovering around $74 a barrel in New York and close to $80 a barrel in London at this point. Jonathan, what's getting your attention there?
Well, look, big cap is in, Frank. Disney up 6% after the bell. Procter & Gamble at an all-time high. TJ Maxx also at an all-time high. And a lot of the oil stocks, look, they've been buffeted by many different factors, economic, global, in terms of security, et cetera. I still think you want to stick with those large, well-diversified, big cap oil stocks. XLE, that's the one I own over at capitalspig.com. If you're looking for dividend yield, AMZA, that's an ETF, Frank, that actually holds a basket of master limited partnerships, all involved in the oil or natural gas transport business, AMZA. But, this is an area of the market that's going to give you a rocky ride, given all the factors. But I still think, as we've talked about, look, in the 70s, oil was the only sector of the stock market which made money. I still think we're in an inflationary period long term, so don't give up on oil stocks just yet.
All right, big oil back in focus, certainly. And what about China here? The Asian stocks, Japan's been talked about lately, and, of course, China always in focus, given its enormous economy and its troubled economy now with that Evergrande meltdown. And it looks like the U.S. Taking new action to protect us technologically from Chinese intrusion. What about China names here?
Yeah, this is a great illustration, Frank, of why politics does matter to the economy. As China's become more authoritarian, as it's become more centrally planned, more government involvement in the economy, its a stock market and its economy has gotten worse and worse. And all you have to do is look at FXI. This is the ETF that tracks the Chinese stocks. It's trading at about 22, Frank. That's where it was trading in 2005. So, it's going back where we were in the, 10, 15, 18 years ago. So bypass China, I think, and focus on the freer parts of the world. If you're, interested in Asian stocks, Frank, I actually think you can buy Taiwan. Sounds a little esoteric, but EWT, that's the ETF that tracks the Taiwanese stock market. And when you think semiconductors, we're talking about NVIDIA and AMD here. The other big one in the space is Taiwan Semiconductor, and that's a major component of TSM, another name that I think can move higher from here.
All right, what about Mexico? This is something we haven't talked about much, but the big news here today, Mexico overtakes China as the leading source of goods imported to the United States. That is certainly big news.
Yeah, it is, and you're seeing it reflected in a lot of actually Mexican stocks traded here in the U.S. And look, the thing to keep in mind, Frank, in my opinion, is that keep in mind mind, trade is good. I think there's been a false interpretation in the last couple of years that somehow when individuals from two different countries trade, someone's a winner and someone's a loser. Trade is always mutually beneficial. So the fact we're buying goods from Mexico is good for us. We get better quality at lower prices, and it's been good for the Mexican economy as well. EWW, that's the index that tracks the Mexican stocks. It's up already this year, almost 4%, right up near its all-time high as well, Frank. So, look, I do think now is the time to diversify away from those magnificent seven. They've been very magnificent, but, especially into international stocks, EWW, I think, is one you could absolutely look at, given the fact, as you said, we're buying more and more from our neighbors south of the border.
Yeah, I think I saw a Mexican airport operator also getting attention. Do you follow that one?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the rising tide lifts all boats. Just as technology led for so long in this country, Frank, when something's hot, I think, in my opinion, don't be afraid to kind of look in other areas. So there's two Mexican names actually I like quite a bit. One is CX. That's a CEMEX. It's a major Mexican cement maker, in fact, benefiting from a lot of the global infrastructure spending. The other one is, as you said, it's a travel play. ASR. It basically runs a lot of the major Mexican airports. And Frank, if you've ever been to either Cozumel or Cancun, they are just lovely. So
right,
on
and
emerging
busy.
tourism in Mexico, yeah, and busy as well. So ASR is one that we hold and definitely want to do your own due diligence, but consider some foreign investments in 24.
Right, and Cemex, I believe is how they pronounce it, has a big plant right in the heart of Hollywood. So drive by that quite a bit and see their cement trucks here in the Los Angeles area. And anytime there's infrastructure news, that one always comes up. Any other specific places where you are putting money here now, Jonathan Honig, and or taking it off the table?
Well, more than anything, Frank, play the long game. You're a newsman. You've been doing this for many years. You cover the news every night for us very diligently. But as investors, we need to try as much as we can to take a slightly longer view. It's going to be a long year. Just as in the early part of last year, we saw bank failures. By the end of the year, that had cleaned up. So a lot still to come. What worries me is that inverted yield curve. We've been talking about it for well over a year now. Still pretty dramatically inverted. So, I'm trying to find those off-the-radar screen ideas. And I'll give you one more, Frank. It's something you can grow. Now, it's not cannabis. Those stocks are not doing so well. It's actually timber. There's a whole basket of timber stocks. And, it's become very fashionable, Frank, with some of the most successful endowments in the country to invest in timber for that reason. It's productive. It's used in housing, used in all forestry, et cetera. CUT, C-U-T. That's the ETF that tracks the timber industry. Consider it as one part of a truly diversified portfolio.
Terrific, Jonathan. Well, thank you very much for covering all the bases here today. We wish you all the best. And, let's do more in 2024 with you on the air here. We always appreciate it. Jonathan Honig, Fox News contributor, portfolio manager at Capitalist Pig Hedge Fund, and author of the book Price is Primary, How to Profit with Any Asset in Any Market at Any Time, and a great contributor to this program. Jonathan, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Frank. Good evening.
Thank you very much. And right out to the freeways now here on 790 KABC. So you've been hurt, and it's time to call a personal injury attorney. But who can you trust? Do your homework, because not all law firms provide the same care, experience, and results do matter. The Fielding Law Team brings years of expertise, and they're concerned about your well-being. Personal injuries can be overwhelming, but with the right ethical attorney by your side, you can navigate the legal process with confidence. Attorney Clark Fielding and his team of legal sharks prioritize transparency, communication, and results. They've been serving our 790 KBC listeners for years. Fielding Law understands the challenges you're facing, and they're ready to fight for the care, follow-up, and compensation you deserve. Before you decide on an attorney to represent you, do your homework, research your options, check their online reviews, and make sure your attorney has a proven track record in personal injury cases. Fielding Law Firm is not just a legal team. They're your advocates and trusted counselors dedicated to achieving the best possible outcome for your case. For a consultation with the Fielding Law Team, call 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. Your journey to justice starts with the right choice. Fielding Law Firm, where your case is their commitment. Yes, you do. 790 KBC welcomes Train and REO Speedwagon. Summer Road Trip 2024 at Kia Forum coming up on September 8th. Tickets on sale now At Ticketmaster.com, right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Before I lose my thought of Train, it's Train and REO Speedwagon coming for their summer road trip 2024 to the Kia Forum, September 8th. Tickets on sale now, and right now, caller 9 wins. Again, the number is 1-888-795-2222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. We have a winner on Wall Street. Record highs for both the Dow and the S&P 500, with the Dow perking up 156 points, settling at 38,677. The S&P 500 at 41 at 49.95, and the Nasdaq up 148 at 15,757. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.12%. The price of oil ticking higher, moving up 12 cents now at 73.98 a barrel. I'll be discussing gas and oil prices and the crisis in the Middle East with John Kilduff, oil analyst at Again Capital and CNBC contributor, will be joining us live here coming up in the next half hour. Checking the crypto action now, a Bitcoin up about 200 at 44,328. Ethereum pulling back slightly, down 6 to 2,424, and Doge at 8 cents. The earnings parade continues after hours. Toy maker Mattel, based here in Southern California, reporting fourth quarter results that missed analyst expectations for some reason. The company saying it plans to cut costs this year while continuing to buy back stock. According to Market Watch, the cost cuts at Mattel, based in El Segundo, follow layoffs by rival Hasbro amid a slowdown in demand for toys, believe it or not. They also come as the other companies over the past several weeks have announced layoffs and plans to tighten up expenses as investors seek out bigger profit margins. Shares of Mattel moving slightly higher after hours, up about 1.5%. And now the latest news for you here in 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Good afternoon. We're doing it live right here in the 4 o'clock hour now in 790 KBC. Streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, and all the podcast platforms. Retail crime, smash and grabs, and now an explosion of graffiti on an unfinished high-rise complex in downtown Los Angeles. Crime overall is certainly a huge issue here in Los Angeles, and a lot riding on the upcoming election for Los Angeles County District Attorney, in which the current DA George Gascon is being challenged for another term in office, while a recall effort continues to move through the court system. Joining us live now is Nathan Hochman, former federal prosecutor, U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and candidate for L.A. County District Attorney. Nathan Hochman, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me on, Frank.
Wonderful to have you with us. And take it from the top. Tell us what you would do to turn things around here in Los Angeles.
Certainly. So what George Gascon has done by instituting blanket pro-criminal policies is he basically is told criminals, especially with respect to theft crimes, that they have a license to steal. If they're juveniles under $950, he has basically said to them he won't prosecute them at all. For everybody else, he won't prosecute them in any measurable sense that encourages law enforcement to arrest them or even store owners to report it. And what he's instituted is basically a spiral of lawlessness. And it starts small. It's someone just walking out of a store with just under $950. That happens on day one. Then you have two people going into a CVS and stealing just $950 on day two. By day 3, 4, and 5, you get up to 100 people doing the flash mob in a 7-Eleven, the smash and grab robberies that we have seen all over the county, and it eventually creates a culture of lawlessness that even leads to violent crime.
What do you tell the police officers who are on the front line of all of this, who are doing their jobs, and then seeing the people they just arrested out a few minutes later?
Well, here's what I would do. I bring 34 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor and a U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and basically tell law enforcement that I'm going to be their partner again. George Gascon has actually been more of a prosecutor of the police than a partner with them. So I would tell them, look, I'm going to do my job in the DA's office and prosecute the cases to the full extent of the law that you bring me, and no longer will we decide like George Gascon ahead of time that there are certain crimes and certain criminals we just won't prosecute. So the idea, again, is to make the line consistently and fairly enforced, which I will do. And the goal is not to fill the prisons. The goal is actually to deter the criminals from committing the crimes in the first place. That's how you measure success, and that's why George Gascon has been a failure.
On the air live with Nathan Hochman, candidate for LA County District Attorney. certainly a lot of business people listening to the show have been impacted by crime, smash and grabs. Retail theft continues to be a huge issue as this crime wave continues. What about that important issue here?
Certainly. George Gascon wasn't even invited to Karen Bass's press conference where she announced the Organized Retail Crime Task Force, because he is such a lightning rod for being pro-criminal rather than pro-business or pro-store owner or pro-victim. I've led task forces myself and would help lead this Organized Retail Crime Task Force to basically make it clear to the criminals that laws will again be enforced in our county. And you won't have a situation where someone's going to get arrested in the morning and out by the afternoon because the DA is promoting a zero bail policy. We will go ahead and actually do our job. And the minute we're doing our job, law enforcement will understand that they can go do their job again. The prosecutors that work for me, those 900 prosecutors, will no longer do what they did with Gascon and vote 97.8% to support his recall. They will be empowered by me and will basically go back to a law enforcement day and age that we had in 2014 that was considered our safest year in the last 50.
I know at least one example where a city turned to federal prosecutors and instead of going to the LA DA in Beverly Hills. We had that shooting incident where somebody tried to steal a watch, and instead of presenting the case to the LA County DA, it went right to federal court, and the charge was interference with commerce, right? Do you remember this? And this is what's happening. Maybe you can apply your federal prosecutor skills and explain the significance of that to happen here.
That was actually a shocking development. The LAPD generally, or the Sheriff's Department, generally bring their cases to the District Attorney's Office because that is where the primary jurisdiction for this type of crime is held. But what happened is that the Sheriff's Department and LAPD had so little confidence that George Gascon would actually hold these criminals accountable for their actions that they shifted it to the federal government. I used to be a federal prosecutor. And again, we would not expect to get state cases or local cases like this. So if I'm the DA or when I'm the DA, we'll go ahead and let the Sheriff's Department know, or let Sheriff Luna, we'll let the police department know that the DA's office is again open for business. The cases can be brought to its rightful and natural home, and will hold criminals accountable for their actions.
What's your reaction to those polls we've been talking about the last couple of years where an overwhelming majority of the deputy DAs in the LA County DA's office now have signaled no confidence in their boss at this point? We've never seen anything like that.
Well, I've never seen. I mean, if any business, imagine having your employees vote 97.8%, but the boss of the business, the CEO or the president, is doing such a bad job that their policies are so misguided. 97.8% of them want that boss to be fired or resign. The typical boss would hide their head in shame and walk out the back door. George Gascon almost used that as a badge of honor, that he knows more, having never personally prosecuted a case in his entire life, than the 900 prosecutors who collectively bring thousands of years of prosecutorial experience to the mission. I would empower those prosecutors. I would learn from them. I would basically work with them to go back to do their jobs and let the same message be known to law enforcement. There's tens of thousands of law enforcement officers who actually want to do their job. And if anything, George Gascon has put the handcuffs on them instead of criminals. I would reverse that on day one.
On there live with Nathan Hochman, a candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney, and certainly the recall effort was largely victim-driven. What's your message to the victims who have been so heartbroken by what's going on?
My message to the victims is, yes, the recalls didn't work, the first or the second one, and George Gascon got lucky. But his luck has run out. He can't dodge this election, that we're having the March 5th primary and then eventually a November 5th general election. And what I would say to the victims, particularly, for instance, victim families, who have not been allowed to have a prosecutor go with them because Gascon has a policy to prevent prosecutors to go with them to parole hearings to face their murderers, that I will reverse that policy. You will see a DA and a prosecutor with victims at all stages of the process to make sure that they are properly represented and the people that murdered one of their family members remain behind bars.
Anything else you'd like to mention about your background? Have you tried cases unlike what we've seen here currently?
Unlike George Gascon, who again never personally tried a case as a prosecutor or defense attorney, I personally prosecuted over 100 cases involving narcotics traffickers, violent gang members, international money launderers. I ran the environmental crime section. I went after corrupt public officials and correct police officers. I've also defended over 200 cases, and I've led the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. I was the president of the LA City Ethics Commission and the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation. And the reason I bring up that experience is that voters should expect that on day one, their DA can be an experienced prosecutor to hold criminals accountable, and I will be that DA for them.
Tell us about the importance of having that kind of experience in this role to have actually essentially done the job.
Well, again, the DA's office is the largest local prosecuting office in the United States, with 900 prosecutors, 1,100 other staff, doing 180,000 criminal cases per year with a $460 million budget. It's actually bigger than 16 states' attorney general's offices. So you need someone that has the proven leadership experience that I have, the 34 years of criminal justice experience, and can be an effective DA on day one. I bring that unique combination of experience to the job and actually could be that DA for the voters on my first day in office.
Nathan Hochman, former federal prosecutor, U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and candidate for L.A. County District Attorney. Thank you very much for taking the call here, live with us here on 790 KABC.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And looks like the rain is taking a bit of a break. Let's get an update now on your freeway ride here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Mottek On Money live for you in the 4 o'clock hour now here on 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com if you're at your computer. And, of course, the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast for you here on all your favorite podcast platforms. Watching the latest developments in the Middle East, the price of oil moving higher for the third day in a row as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to press on with the Gaza war against Hamas terrorists who attacked Israel last October 7th. Meanwhile, a U.S. drone strike hit a car in Iraq's capital Baghdad today, killing 3 members of a powerful militia. That strike coming on a main thoroughfare in eastern Baghdad. The strike also coming amid rising tensions in the region. Days after the U.S. military launched an air assault on dozens of sites in Iraq and Syria used by Iranian-backed militias and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in retaliation to that terrible drone strike that killed 3 U.S. troops in Jordan late January. Following all these developments closely, joining us live now, oil analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor. John, thank you very much for joining us. You joined us on the eve of the retaliatory strikes that the U.S. has now launched. Give us an update on what you're seeing out there.
Well, the strikes, Frank, and always good to be with you, continue here apace. Today was definitely a ramping up of them, and this was a notable attack on this individual that you mentioned, and obviously in the heart of Iraq itself. It's sort of deja vu for some of us like yourself even, who have been around this whole situation for what is now pushing over 20 years. Today, the oil market keeps getting buffeted, I will tell you, with headlines that there's a potential for a peace breakthrough with Hamas, with the whole situation with Israel. But then at the same time, the positive stories get walked back. As you mentioned today, it was Benjamin Netanyahu who said that several of the elements of the deal that he heard about were non-starters. And so that got oil back on the bid again and got Brent crude oil back over the $80 a barrel mark. And we're going to be swinging like this. I will say, I think I mentioned this to you when we were on last, that where there's smoke, there's fire in terms of a peace deal here in the making. In terms of political rhetoric in that part of the world, it's just always on fire in terms of extremes. So the President Netanyahu's statements today shouldn't be a surprise, but I also wouldn't be surprised if at some point here, particularly if we can get a firm feel or grasp that the hostages will be released finally and returned, that would be a deal in the making. And that's what's being worked on, from what I'm hearing, very heavily. And that's why you're not seeing a severe reaction in the oil market right now to what would otherwise been a pretty dim view of the situation by Mr. Netanyahu today.
In the meantime, the price of oil is at or near the high point of 2024 anyway, with crude oil in Brent crude in London, for example, close to $80 a barrel, right? And we are watching the New York price just below $74 a barrel at this point. Obviously, this impacts gas prices here at the consumer level. Where do you expect prices to go at this point?
I mean, the upside, the potential for an upside spike, Frank, is clear and present as a danger for sure. What the U.S. is doing right now, what continues to go on, to the extent that there are now an Iranian response to what happened today, all bets are off in terms of this becoming a fuller conflagration in the region. And that's why you have a very nervous oil market, like you just said, near its highest level, in months, really. But the other problem we're having as well, if for lack of a better term, is that the Ukrainians are having a good string of success here attacking Russian oil infrastructure, including several major refineries. And so we're finally potentially on the cusp here of losing Russian supplies of crude oil and of refined products like diesel fuel in particular to the global market. It's a weird phenomenon, but we had avoided that since this war started, even though those were our greatest fears, that we would lose those Russian supplies. Now it's starting to come home to roost. You're seeing diesel prices in particular here in the U.S. and globally really start to climb as a result of this renewed worry. So there's a lot going on here for the oil market, and we, to the extent that we enjoyed some relatively low prices, I know California drivers just never seem to get a break for a variety of reasons. But the rest of the country, the rest of the world for that matter, the party may be over in terms of this relative price stability that we've been experiencing.
On the air live with veteran oil analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor. Another big story, John, certainly want to get your reaction to this. All of a sudden, U.S. oil production reaches an all-time high. What's been going on? We've been hearing all the politics here of the war on fossil fuels and all that, and famously the president canceling the pipeline project and all of that. And what's going on behind the scenes quietly? All of a sudden, the U.S. is oil production is reaching an all-time high, surpassing Russia and even Saudi Arabia.
But, surpassing Saudi Arabia, Frank, by a lot. We're at 13 million barrels a day plus, and the Saudis have dialed themselves back to about 9, and they have actually backed away from the commitment to get themselves to a capacity of 13, not to be producing it. Look, do you want to say President Biden got a bad rap? I don't know. Let's look at where this drilling is occurring. It's occurring in Texas and New Mexico and Oklahoma, places that are very favorable to the industry. I'll also tell you that $70 a barrel plus crude oil is an unbelievable, fantastic operating environment for these companies. I know the stocks have been treading water and they haven't been doing much after their terrific run in the aftermath of the Ukraine war starting off. But I will tell you that they are minting money. You're going to hear them talking about, stock buybacks continuing, increased dividends. And now with Exxon and Chevron and some of the other companies in Occidental sort of consolidating what they've been doing, it's only going to get better. So these are very safe investments now. The big companies in particular are finally taking over in the Permian. And look, it's good old-fashioned American ingenuity, Frank. And we talk about that number, that crude oil production number. I would just like to point out as well that we are exporting not too far away from what Saudi Arabia exports in terms of crude oil, but when you add in refined products, we're exporting over 10 million barrels a day. When you add in gasoline and diesel fuel, we are truly the petroleum supplier to the world anymore, and it's been a remarkable situation. Also, too, part of these good GDP numbers that we're seeing, the gross domestic product, the economy, a lot of that, there's a good nugget of that is these crude oil and refined product exports that are helping to juice that number. So it's an interesting situation.
Definitely, John. Well, thank you very much for that thorough analysis. As always, we do appreciate it and look forward to staying in close contact with you as we follow all these developments. That's oil analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Stay tuned now for Randy Wang with the 790 KBC News Blitz. You're listening to 790 KBC.
Former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan shares real stories from real people from all walks of life on The Sean Ryan Show.
Laird Hamilton, welcome to the show, man.
The truth about a good surfer is ultimately that you understand waves. You're actually a wave reader. I can go to the beach, we're watching a wave come in, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that guy's going to crash.
Is that intuition or is that learned?
Yes, the learned becomes intuition. When you have that much volume of experience, it goes into the unconscious.
The Sean Ryan Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.